Hello and welcome, I'm Dave. In today's lesson, we'll add React Table to our Next.js full stack project. I'll provide a link to all resources in the description. And I'll also provide a link to join my Discord server where you can discuss this Next.js full stack project with fellow students, ask questions, and help each other out. Hey guys, a big shout out and thank you to Sentry for making this full stack Next.js educational video series possible. Sentry is defining debuggability in full stack web applications, and I consider Sentry to be an essential part of my tech stack. From error reporting, logging, and tracking to identifying performance issues with tracing, to user session replays, and much more, Sentry will help you write and ship code that delivers exceptional user experiences. Follow the Sentry links in the video description or just visit Sentry.io and use the code davegray to get 3 months of the Sentry team plan for free. In this Next.js full stack project series, I'm using the same tech stack that I've been working with on a major project at my job over the past year. For viewers, students, and subscribers that have asked what I work with on a daily basis, this is definitely the tutorial series to watch. I've got VS Code open and we're looking at the user stories as usual to start off the lesson. I'm going to go ahead and press Ctrl K and then the letter V to open up my Markdown preview, and I have the extension to do that I've previously covered in other lessons. But right now we've got the preview over here to the right and we've got the Markdown file to the left. And I want to look at number 5. In the last lesson, we said provide easy navigation and search for customers and tickets. Well, we upgraded the header navigation and we did provide a search, and we're returning that data. Today, we'll want to display that data in a nice React table. But we can go ahead and check this off, even if we make some improvements to this feature along the way, because I'd say we achieved that goal. Today we will be working towards this show a real-time open tickets page after the login, but really I'm going to focus on customers, so working towards it, and we'll eventually get there. Big news since the last lesson I recorded, React version 19 is now available as a stable release. And so I've been completing this series while Next.js 15 is very new and React 19 has been a release candidate, but now it's a stable release. And if we look at the blog, we can see this just happened on December 5th, 2024, so very recent. However, you may be watching this in the future. It may not be an issue at all. You may already have React 19 installed or later releases even, and that's okay as well. But right now, let's go back to VS Code and add the latest version of React 19 to our project. And we're back in VS Code, and you can see I have the package.json file open, and I'm looking at the React versions that were currently installed with Next.js 15. We have Next 15.0.1. However, here we have React, and you can see it's 19, but then it has an RC at the end for release candidate, and it has some other characters as well. And the same for React DOM. So we want to update those. Might as well go ahead and update Next to the latest release while we're at it. So let's go ahead and open a terminal with Control and the backtick. I'll type clear to go ahead and remove what I had above where I was displaying the Git branches of the repository. But for now, let's type npm I for install and then next at latest. And then we can also have React at latest and then React-DOM at latest. Go ahead and press enter. This will install the latest of all 3 of these into our project, and we should no longer have the release candidate listed in our package.json when we're finished, so we'll take a look at that as soon as these installations finish. The installations are complete. I'll close a terminal window and let's take a look. We now have React 19.0.0, the same for React DOM. No more release candidates. And for Next, instead of 15.0.1, we have 15.1.0, so a newer release of Next as well. Once again, a reminder, if you're watching in the future, you may have newer versions of all of these things. And we are not yet finished adding dependencies for this lesson. I'm now on the data table page in the ShadCN docs. And you can see a lot on this page. It's actually very useful, and it combines React Table in this page. So it's not just the table. If you go to the table, if you scroll way down here in ShadCN, there is just a table page, which can be very useful. But this is the data table page. And if we scroll down here, there's an introduction, and I invite you, of course, to learn all about this that you can. I'm going to go through it faster than that, and you'll just see how I use it. But we've got the installation of ShadCN table right here, and then we're going to follow that up with the installation of React table from Tanstack. So we'll need both of these. Let's go ahead and copy the first one, and let's go back to VS Code and add table from ShadCN. Back in VS Code, I'm going to once again open the terminal window, and from there I'm going to paste in that npx ShadCN at latest add table. Now, ShadCN has updated the installer, so we didn't need to add that legacy peer deps flag here. It's going to ask us about it, so I'll go ahead and say yes, okay to proceed. And it needed to install an update to ShadCN. We can see that as well. And now it's got the table already, so that's all we needed to do. So we didn't have to add a legacy peer deps flag there. We will have to, though, for React table. So now I'll type npm I at tanstack / react - table. Then we need -- legacy - peer - deps. And this is because not every dependency has caught up to the latest release of React yet. React 19 is just now stable. So we've still got to give these packages time. If you are watching this tutorial in the future, you may not need to use the legacy peer deps flag at all, but you'll know because you'll get an error if you don't use it, and it will recommend using it if you don't, if you need it. So for now, I'm just going to press enter, go ahead and add React table as a dependency to our project. Now that it's installed, we can look at our package JSON once again, and we should see that dependency here. So let's find it, and I may need to close the package JSON and reopen it, and there it is, Tanstack / React table version 8.20.5 as of the making of this video. Okay, let's close the package JSON file, and we're going to focus on the customer segment in this video. So let's scroll up now to where we have the RS route group. Open that up, go inside the customers directory, and let's click on the page.tsx. This is the server component that starts the customer segment in our project. I'll go ahead and press Control B so we have just a little more room for now. But at the very top, I want to import Sentry. So import all as Sentry from at Sentry / Next.js. And I'm importing Sentry because I want to measure the performance of our database query. And then we're going to change the database query, and we can compare the performance of the old query to the new one, see which one we want to keep. So to do that, I'm going to define a span with Sentry, and I'm going to say const span equals Sentry, and there's several different types of spans you can use. I'm going to say start inactive span. And now this receives an object inside, so I'll put in curly brackets here, and I'm just going to give it a name. And in the span, I'll put in the name of the query. So I'm going to copy this get customer search results. Now this is going to be our first version, so I'll put -1, just so I have something to differentiate it from the second query that we're going to have. And of course, it's still going to be a get customer search results query. But we've started the span here. Now after that, I want to end the span after, so I'll call span .end. Now this is going to start a trace in Sentry. It will send it back to our dashboard, and we can look at the results, see how long this query takes, for example. So just one of the ways you can use Sentry to really help the performance of your application and gauge what you do and don't want to possibly do with your application. Now, like I said, there's several different types of spans you can start. The reason I like the inactive span, there's also just a start span method, but it takes an async function as a second param here, and then you would put the query inside of that function. However, I want to use results still outside of the function, so I wouldn't want to define it in there. You could end up with a let results above and then assign results, but you're going to get into some TypeScript problems. It's just easier to use the start inactive span that I can manually end after I define results. So that's how I'm setting this up. Now we'll come back to this measurement later on just to see how it's going with the first query. And of course, we'll take those measurements with the application running in dev mode, and we haven't even started it yet because we want to prepare to display those results in a table. So let's get started building our React table, and then we'll come back and check the measurements afterwards. So inside of our customers directory, we have a page.tsx and a customer search.tsx. Let's create a new file here and call it customer table.tsx. I'm going to once again press Control B to hide the file tree for now, just give us some more room to see the code. And the table is a client component. So we'll start with the use client directive. Then we're going to import type, and it's a type we've already created. It is our select customer schema type. And so after that, let's import what we need from React table. And I'll put each of these on a new line. We need the create column helper. React table works very well with TypeScript, so we'll keep that in mind as we go. And it also infers types to help us. We'll have get core row model. I didn't say flex render, but I imported it there. Flex render will help us render the cell data, each cell in the table. And then we need the use React table hook. We're going to keep our table for customers fairly simple compared to our tickets table. So this is a good one to start with in this project. This is all going to come from @Tanstack/React table. Okay, those are our React table imports. Now let's get our ShadCN imports. Here we're going to import table, table body, that's a capital B on body, table cell, capital C on cell, table head, I think you see the pattern, and table header, and finally table row. Now these are all going to come from @/components/UI/table. And I just noticed my inconsistency. I used double quotes on most everything, but I used single quotes around the Tanstack/React table. So I'm just going to change those to double quotes, or it's probably going to drive me crazy. Okay, after that, let's import use router because we're going to need that as well. And that comes from Next.js. So we'll say from, actually it comes from Next/navigation, but that's part of Next.js. And now let's scroll just a little more and we need to define our props. So type props, fairly easy for this table component. It's going to be data, and this is going to be the select customer schema type that we brought in, and it's going to be an array of that data type. Okay, with all of that complete, we're ready to start the function now. So let's say export default function customer table, and this is going to receive the data. So let's destructure that and match it up with the props type. Now, inside of the function, the first thing we'll do is define router and set that equal to use router, so we can use that later on. And now there's so many ways to define a table with React table. You can loop over an array, you can manually define each column. We're going to do the simple way of looping over an array for the customer table because we don't have a whole lot of modifications to make. But we don't want to use every piece of data from the customers table. That would be too much to display. So let's pick and choose which columns will be displayed. And to do so, I'm going to define a column headers array. So this will contain the headers for the columns. So this would be an array type. Say it's a key of our select customer schema type. And now here's our array. So we'll just put in the keys. We have first name, we also have a last name, and these are the columns and the data that we want to see in the table. So after that, we also want email and then maybe phone. These are things we would search for to look up a customer. Maybe which city they're from, And let's say the computer shop's not next to another state, like Kansas City, close to where I live, for example, is on the border. So it could be in Missouri or Kansas. So if that situation happened, maybe you would want to be able to search by state here. But we're going to say the computer repair shop is not next to a state on either side like that. So we don't need that one, but let's say zip, because that would still work in many situations, just like searching for a state. Somebody gave you their zip code. So these are the fields we're going to use to really search for customers with and display in our table. But this is going to help us create our table because now we have the column headers array. We can use that as we build this table. So now let's define our column helper. I'm going to set this equal to create column helper that we imported. Whoops, column helper. There we go. And now this is also the select customer schema type, and we just call that function. And we'll use that as we create the table. And now I need to define the columns of the table. Now, there's several ways to do this, as I'd mentioned, and one way that you may see is a manual way. So you might have your array, because the columns will be an array, and then you might have column helper, and let's say dot. So you can have display or accessor. We're going to use accessor most of the time. So you could have any of those. Let me just put accessor here. And let's say you had a first name value here, and then you have a second argument. And for example, let's say header, and here you wanted the first name actually be displayed like that. So that's very simple. Now you would just fill this up with many of these. So you'd put a comma after this, or create the same thing for last name and so on. You could do that manually if you want to. We're not going to do that. We're going to take that column headers array. So column headers array dot map, and then we're going to map over it with the column name, and then we'll have our arrow function. And now inside of this, we will return column helper dot accessor, and we'll have the column name here once again. And after that, you can see the pattern now because it's much like what I did before. I left out the ID, but we'll go ahead and put an ID here. So column name for an ID. We'll also put in a header, and here you could pass a function, and then you would return something. This might be a place to say use a lookup object if you wanted to match the actual names from the database or the database query. So first name with no spaces and a lowercase f, for example, matched up to first name with a capital F, space, and then of course a capital N for name, and just pull out the name the way you want to. I'm going to keep it simple here. So I'm going to capitalize the first letter by saying column name, and just look at that first letter here in the first position, and then call dot to uppercase. So there's our capitalized letter. Then we can concatenate that with the plus symbol and say column name dot slice 1. So that gets the rest of it. And so I'm capitalizing the first letter, but first name, for example, will just have a capital F and an N, but no space. So keeping it fairly simple here, but I think it's going to look okay. And this is going to create all of the columns because we're mapping over each value here in our headers array, and it's created each column. And there are other settings that you could look at in the docs for Tanstack React Table. Many other things you can pass in here. So this is just keeping it simple. We'll look at a few more of those things when we create the tickets table. But for now, it's time to create the table itself, and we do that with the use table hook, or I should say use React table. So const table equals use React table. Now here we have another object inside, and we pass in the data that we receive in the component. Then we also pass in the columns that we just defined, and then we need to pass in get core row model. So get core row model, and then we call it over here, get core row model, and we call that function. Now that's all the React table hook needs, but now we need to actually create the table in the JSX, and this is where the ShadCN components come in handy as well. So we'll have a return, and I'll scroll for room because we're going to need all of that room here as we create the JSX. I'm going to wrap the entire thing in a div. And this div is going to have a class name. I'm going to set this equal to margin-top of 6, because remember we'll have that search box above, so we want to create some space. Rounded.lg, because I'm going to put a border on this div and round the corners. I'm also going to say overflow-hidden, and that way it will hide the corners of the table underneath when it rounds it. And then border, and then border-border. And so it will give it just a very small border, I believe 1 pixel. Okay, now let's put the table inside, and we'll start with the table component from ShadCN. So table, also want a class name here, and this is more or less to override what is already on this table component. So I'm making that border disappear so I don't double up. Okay, after that, table header, no classes on that. But inside the table header, now we can start to access the table that we defined with the use React table hook. And this is where we'll start to get our data. So here we'll have table.get header groups, and that's a function that we call. And then we'll map over that. Then we'll have a header group that is going through the mapped function here. Of our arrow, I'm going to put in a parenthesis so we can go down to the next line. And here we're going to return parentheses there. And really, we shouldn't need that since we used parentheses before, but maybe we do because of the extra parentheses. Let's double check that before. Let's see if we get anything telling us otherwise when I finish. We'll have our table head, which you need a key as you map over. So this is the header.id, not headers, just header.id. Okay, after that, class name, let's give this equal to background-secondary. So the header stands out a little bit. Okay, now inside the table head, we're going to have a div. And now inside of this, we're going to look at the header.is placeholder. And now, if it is a placeholder, we return null. Otherwise, we return the flex render function that we imported. And here we have header.column.column.def.header. And believe it or not, that's how you get the header data out of that. And then we also need the context. So we have header.getContext, and we call that function. And I've got a lot of red here, and I can see why quickly, because I left out a line that I should have here. So after we map over the header group, the next thing we need actually is the table row, and I left that. So here we had the table header. Then we start to map over this. Then we need the table row. And here we put in a key, and this looks like a header group .id because we were mapping over the header group. So there we go. Close that out and we get our closing table row, but of course that is not where it goes. So let's go ahead and cut that, and let's scroll down now to underneath the table head, and then we had the parentheses, the double parentheses, and the curly bracket, and then table row. And once again, I am wrong there. I believe I put it after and it should have been before, but I could have something else off. But no, that looks right. So it does get a little complicated as you have one map over the other because we're not entirely finished yet. So you have a table header, and then you're mapping over the header group, and then you start the table row. But after you've started the table row, you can see how I got off track here, then you actually have the header group dot headers dot map, and you map over each header, and that's where I was referencing header below, and we see all the red. So we needed this header here as well. After that, we need our arrow and our curly brace. Let's go ahead and delete these extras for now, and we'll figure out where we want to close this function at too. Now we want to scroll down to just before the table row, and let's create a new line, and let's put in our curly brace, and then let's put in a parentheses, and then one more curly brace, and we should be good. So it probably would have helped if I had done that in order just a little bit better than I did. So let's go back over this and we'll find our other mistake as well. And our other mistake, I can clearly see where we're now inside of the map referencing header. I still typed headers right there. So now we should be good. Let's break this down. We have our div on the outside of the table. Now we have our table and our table header. Inside the table header, we map over a header group. And then we have a table row. Inside of the table row, we break out the header group that's currently being mapped over here. So now we have our individual header group, and now it has a headers array. So now we get the header here, and here is where we return table head. Now we could get rid of the curly braces here and use another parentheses and not use the return keyword. That's what I was talking about before when I messed up and went to the wrong line and I saw that return. So when you use a parentheses like this, notice there is no return before table row because we didn't use a curly bracket, we used the parentheses. Then down here inside of the table row, when we created this map needs a return because we used the curly brace here. So there's a difference there, two different patterns. Maybe you'd think, okay, I should use the same one. And that's a valid concern if you would have that thought. So we could delete the curly brace here, delete the return keyword, bring this parentheses up here. Then we could delete the curly brace there as well. And now I think we would be back on track because here is the parentheses to parentheses. And you could put these on the same line if you wanted to, because this matches up with that header group right there. So you could break this down. But if we save, will it make a difference? No, they stay kind of mapped to the same area. So let's just put the curly brace back up there. Once again, I hope you understand, and you should at this level, of course, that the return keyword is not required if we're wrapping it in parentheses. But if we wrap in curly braces, as I previously did, we would. So that looks good. You can go over this code, of course, in the course repository too, if you miss anything. I can see how it clearly starts to look complicated as you're mapping twice as you create this table. Now, if that wasn't complicated enough, we just created the table header. So after that, we need to go ahead and create the table body. So let's create some more room for this. We can add the code that goes in the table body. Once again, we're going to reference the table and then call get row model. That is a function call. Then we'll have rows and we'll map over the rows. So now for each row here, I'll go ahead and use parentheses to keep the same pattern going. We'll start our table row. Now I'm going to come down to the next line because we're going to have several things here. I'll set the key equal to row.id. Now I'm going to set several classes. So I'll use class name and I'm going to use the cursor dash pointer. This is because we're going to make each row clickable. Then we're going to have hover, background border, and we can put in a slash and set the opacity. I want to set that to 25. Now dark mode will have hover, and then we'll set the background to bg-ring, which is different, /40 for opacity. Also Alt-Z to wrap that down so we don't start scrolling off the page. And now let's go ahead and add the onClick. And this will make each row clickable. So with the onClick, we call a function. Inside of it, we'll have router.push. And now we need a template literal. And we want to click on a customer in the table, which would take us to the customer edit page. So we could edit any customer that way just by clicking on their row in the table. So here we'll have /customers/form. And then we can put in our question mark to add our search param. We'll put in customer ID equals, now $, curly brace, row.original.id, and that provides the ID of the customer. Okay, after that, we're ready to close out the row. Now, inside of the row, we want to render the data, of course, for that row and each cell within. So here we're going to have row.get visible cells, call that function, and we map over, and now this would be for each cell in the row. So for each cell of data, we'll have our arrow function. I'll put a parentheses once again, and we can start our table cell. We need to set a key here as well while we map. So this would be the cell.id. After that, class name, and we'll set this equal to border. Once again, overriding, I believe, what is already on that ShadCN element, and it should end up where we have a single border on everything this way. But if not, maybe I'm thinking where this adds it. It's a border width of 1 pixel though, so maybe I'm overriding the width there. Okay, now we need to render the data, and we do use it, or we do it by calling that flex render function once again. So here's flex render. Inside it takes 2 params. The first is cell.column def.cell. Whoa, I need a capital D there, def.cell. And the next is the cell.get context. Very similar to what we did with the header when we used flex render. Let's scroll back up and look at that. So we had flex render. You can see here we got the header data and the header context for that. Here we did that for the cell. Now flex render takes the cell definition and the context, and it renders it with all the necessary props and context. This is something specific to React Table. We imported the flex render function from React Table. It's a helper function that React Table provides. Now the table body went a little bit smoother for me without any typos, and I think we're finished with the table in general. So if we come back up, one more quick look, we start with the div, then we define the table, then we define the table header, and then after the table header, we define the table body. And of course it contains the rows, and the row contains all of the cells. So that should be the complete table component. And for some reason I had create column imported up here. That's not needed. We just need create column helper. There we go. Let's save this component, go back to the page.tsx that is the beginning of our customer segment, and we need to import the customer table now. You can see it comes from /customer table, but if we keep the same pattern that we've had before, we want to say @/app/rs/customers, and we don't need a second slash. There we go. So we want to use our new component where we were just providing the stringified results here. So let's get rid of this paragraph that has the stringified results, and instead let's check to see if we have results.length. Essentially, if we have data in the array we receive as results, then let's use a ternary, and we can provide the customer table, set the data equal to the results that we receive. And then, of course, let's have the false part of the ternary as well. I'm going to use parentheses once again to wrap down to the next line. Here I'll return a paragraph. Last name with a margin top of 4, just say no results found. So we want to say something if we search and don't find anything. So that will take care of that as well. Okay, we're ready to start the project up with npm run dev and do a few searches and see how our table looks. So I'll meet you back in the application after you have logged in and I've done the same. All right, I've logged into the application, and if you remember from last time, we're now showing the ticket results, and of course these are all the open tickets that show by default, and we're still stringifying that data. So we want to go to the user page here, or I said user, the customers page, where we search customers. We also added this nice little menu in the last lesson. So let's click search customers, and it should take us to that page. Here is our search input where we can search for customers. So let's go ahead and search for Bob, press enter, and you can see we've got a table now that has first name, last name, email, phone, city, and zip, and here is Bob, and you can see it does change as I hover over the row. Let's go ahead and get all of the customers, and we can do that because we're matching anything in any of these fields. So an easy way to do it, search for the @ symbol because they all have that in their email. Press enter, and here are all the customers that we have in the database. And so we could click on any one of these and go to the edit page, for example. So I'll click on Bob now. And of course, being in dev mode here, it has to render just a little bit as we get that going, but it shouldn't take too long. And now I have got the edit customer page for Bob, for example. Go back. Now it shouldn't take as long to render after it does the first one, because now we've got the edit page for John Doe and so on. So we can always just go back to this same results page with the table here. But there is something that came up in the comment section, and I like it when I get good feedback in the comments, and I really appreciate this when somebody mentioned, hey, what if you want to search for the first name combined with the last name, for example? Because, yeah, you could just search for Dave and get Dave. But what if you searched for Dave space Gray and you search? There's no results found. Well, that doesn't seem to make sense, does it? But those are separate fields, and we were matching any one field. There is no one field that has Dave Gray in it. It's actually a combination of two. So let's go back and change our query, and then we can actually get all the results, because we would be able to match the first and last name as well, and maybe even a partial, maybe even just the initials if I typed in D space G, for example. So let's see how we can set that up back in VS Code. Back in VS Code, I'm going to make sure I stop the dev server with Control-C, and now I can close the terminal, and I wanted to make sure I stopped it because I don't want it to continue to run or accidentally do any queries that we don't want to have the same results with. So this was the old query. It's get customer search results -1. So we did a few queries there, and those should have got recorded to Sentry. Now I'm going to put in -2 here inside of our page.tsx in our Sentry span as we measure the results after we change this query. So we can Control-S to save. Now I could open the file tree to see this query, but I can also just hold down the Control button and click on this function, and it opens up the get customer search results.ts as well. So that's where we want to be. This is now inside of the lib/queries here. So the lib directory queries, now get customer search results is where we're at. We're going to make a few changes here. One change, we don't really need all of these comparisons. It takes, of course, milliseconds, but it does add extra time to compare each of these fields. We're not using all of these fields. You remember, we're using the first and last name, we're using the email and phone, but we decided not to search for address, address to. We decided not to search for state, and I gave an example of where you may want to keep state in instead of one of these others, for example, but I think city and zip pretty well cover it, and we don't need the notes field searchable like that either. So we could eliminate those. I commented these out for now, but I'll go ahead and remove them. I just wanted to comment them out as I was talking about it, and you're going to see how we're going to put in a change for first and last name as well. So first of all, let's remove these. You would think this would speed things up even if it was just milliseconds, just because it doesn't have to search through each one of those fields as well. Okay, but after that, let's consider what we're going to do for the first and last name. Well, up here at the top, besides I like and or, we also need to import SQL from Drizzle ORM. Now, this is one thing I really like about Drizzle. If they don't have something built into the ORM, the way that you're used to writing, say, normal SQL queries, well, then you can just write normal SQL, and we can use this SQL import here to help us do that. So after we've imported that, let's just come down here to the bottom of our where. This continues in the OR clause. We'll try SQL, so our SQL. Now let's start a template literal with the backticks. I'm going to type lower parentheses and cat parentheses. Now $ curly brace, we can say customers dot first name. So this is really kind of a hybrid. I mean, we're writing SQL like we would, but we're still inserting JavaScript as well. Now after this, the concat function needs to know what all to concatenate. So we're going to say first name, then we're going to put in a single quote, a space, and a single quote. So that gives a space. And then We're going to insert the customer's dot last name here as well. And now we've got both parentheses after that. And that's what we want, but we're not finished writing SQL yet. Now this is more like I would actually write SQL if I was just writing a SQL query. I'll press Alt-Z also so this wraps down as we go. We have like, and now I need a $sign and a curly brace, and now I need a template literal inside of this insert. And here I'm going to have the wildcard, and then I'm going to have the insert once again of our search text. I'm going to say dot to lowercase dot replace. Now replace function, we're going to replace that space, and we're going to replace it with a wildcard. Now after that, we've got a curly brace, and then after the curly brace, we need another wildcard as our template literal inside the insert completes, and then we have another backtick. Well, then we have backtick, curly brace, backtick to end it. So it looks a little crazy. It's a little bit hard to wrap your head around. It doesn't use I like, which made that case insensitive way more convenient, but it does end up doing the same thing because we use lower here. Then we concat, so we can actually search the first and last name. And what's even better, it can say just use the first initial of the first name and the first initial of the last name, because we're even replacing the space with this parenthesis or this wildcard here, this percentage sign. Okay, let's save this and let's try it out back in the application. So we need to start that application up once again with npm run dev, and I'll once again meet you back in the running application. All right, back in the application where we left off. Now this may need to re-render, so I'm just going to refresh the page because it will take it just a second. But after we get those results back, then we can test out more queries with this new query that we've got. So here we once again had the percent when I actually refreshed the page, so it completed that search anyway. But now let's go ahead and search for, well, let's just do my name first, Dave. There we go, it's fine. Now let's do what we tried before. Let's type my last name after a space. And now we have a result. We didn't get no results. What if I just type my first initial space, and then my last initial? Still got my name. So what if we did, that was Jane, I think, Smith. So let's have just Jane S. There she is. I think we had John Doe, so let's say J space D. Yes, we did. That works great. Okay, let's do the letter A and see who all we have. Okay, so there's Charlie Davis. So if I type DAV, we match both my name and his last name, Davis. So what if we just said C space D, and we match Charlie Davis? So that combination is working the way we want it to. Hey, that's a great thing. So now I think this is a little bit better search, and I really appreciate that YouTube comment that helped add this additional feature. So we can have Dave G, and he comes up just fine. Okay, I am now in my Sentry dashboard, and I am on the traces page. You can see traces up here. Click on traces in the left hand after you log into Sentry to see that, and we can search for our spans here. So here I want to search for get customer search results -1. Press enter, and yes, we've got some results for that. So let's check it out. We can see it's taking milliseconds of time here, and if we click on details, we could even probably get some more here, but the span says, well, here I clicked, I'm getting lots of details. Here's get customer search results -1. It took 164.7 milliseconds. It looks like what that took. That's not that long when it comes down to milliseconds. However, it's still notable that we can compare it to something else. Let's break one of these down. We can see inside of customers, and here was, of course, another request. This one, if we have the full span duration, 251 milliseconds, 240 milliseconds. Let's look at another one here, 164. So we're anywhere in between, say, 164 and 250. We could look at a few more of these here. 156 and 250. Come down 159. So let's say 150 to 250 is our span duration. Clearly a couple took longer than the others did, but overall, well, here, let's look at this one too. What do we have? Span duration 288 up here. So, well, that was / customers duration. Here's the span duration of 251 once we broke that down. So yeah, just looking at those numbers to compare. So 150 to 250, 12 minutes, 13 minutes ago, 14 minutes ago, as I was making this tutorial, for example. Okay, so now let's come back up, search for -2. Is it going to be significantly longer, or is it still going to be about the same? That's what I would like to know. So if we look at this, and we have get customer search results -2, 510 milliseconds for that span duration. Let's look at the next one, 221. Look at another, 160. Click on this to see some more detail. For example, here's get customer search results 2, 160.97. Okay, so a wide variety there, and I'm curious why that one was so much more, the 510. So let's click on that. Yes, it says search results -2, 510. Who knows exactly what it was, but it's worth comparing back and forth. I didn't notice a whole lot as I used it. However, that's noticeable. That more than doubled the other responses there. So we have to stop and think. Are we weighing out how long the search is going to take versus the functionality that it provides our users? But overall, we can see where most of the time, here's one that's even lower. Get customer search results 141, 142. So there could be an anomaly that we cut off the edges and look at the average. But overall, even 138. So maybe as we continued to use it here 5-6 minutes ago and so on, maybe it even got a little bit better. No, this was 5 minutes ago. So one of the last ones we used actually was the longest duration that I was talking about. But that seems like the anomaly. Most of the time, it was faster than that. So this could really help you catch a bottleneck if it occurred. So I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to actually have the first and last name search in here? Is that something you think would happen more often? Or would you just tell the employees, hey, search by last name, because it takes you longer to type out the first and last name anyway? Who knows? But those are things to consider as you go, and Sentry can help you measure all of that as you add in spans, and it's interesting to see the time of each of these queries here as we look at the spans we logged inside of our traces dashboard with Sentry. Okay, in the next lesson, we're going to apply some advanced table features for our tickets table. We're going to have pagination, we're going to have filtering and sorting. So I'll see you in the next lesson. A quick shout out to my patrons. Holy Coder is a progress provider. Sean Lynch and Gregory Perry are senior patrons. And all of my junior patrons, Isaac, Will, Stacy, Abe, Ernie, Javier, Michael, Heath, Malik, thank you all so very much. You're helping me reach my goals. And if you'd like to learn more about my Patreon, check it out at patreon.com/davegray. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.